The national symbol of grief and loss, the Canadian flag flying at half-mast in Nova Scotia and the nation's capital tonight. Flying in honor of Nova Scotia and the many victims who died in one of the worst mass killings this country has ever seen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carole MacNeil. This is the CBC News Special. What happened in Nova Scotia this past weekend is every community's worst nightmare. A member of the community turning on his own fellow citizens with unimaginable viciousness. It's also particularly difficult when it's a rural community, so far away from the resources needed. So, in difficult times, difficult questions need to be asked. Did the RCMP members in Nova Scotia have what they needed to handle the worst threat a community can face? We'll talk about that tonight. But first, let's begin in Nova Scotia. The anchor for CBC Nova Scotia News, Tom Murphy, joins me. He is outside the RCMP detachment in Enfield, where there's a growing tribute to the victims. Tom.
Hi there, Carol. Yeah, it's been quite impressive to watch. There's been a steady stream of people here over the last half an hour or so that I've been standing here. Look behind me, it's just growing in size, and the message is all very familiar. You know, thanks for saving our community, and thank you for keeping us safe. Many of it directed towards Constable Stephenson, who died in this rampage here in Nova Scotia. There's been a good deal of mention of her and her heroic acts on that day, on Sunday, and so people remembering that. That's sort of the scene outside here. People with their emotional messages for sure. Inside in this detachment, and presumably in a good many detachments in central and northern Nova Scotia, which are sort of the geographic area for this rampage, you can bet that there's plenty of investigation underway. We heard from some of the RCMP officials today that this investigation will take months. It is considered to be a very complex investigation with multiple crime scenes to look at. Here now is the latest on the investigation.
They are the fingerprints of a mass killer, the charred and leveled homes, the burned out cars. Evidence of a crime spree that is now being meticulously combed through, a twisted puzzle that's spread over more than 90 kilometers. No fewer than 16 crime scenes, according to the RCMP.
We're relatively confident we've identified all the crime scenes. However, we've been unable to fully examine the crime scenes because, for instance, we have had 5 structure fires, most of those being residences, and we believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
So that's 18 victims and counting, all adults. Their connection or their randomness to the killer still not clear.
The subject did know some of his victims, and yet others he did not know.
And the questions, they keep coming. Among them, the police uniform, or the facsimile thereof, the killer was wearing. Where did the shooter get it? Investigators don't know.
His ability to move around the province undetected was surely greatly benefited by the fact that he had a police or a vehicle that looked identical in every way to a marked police car. And beyond that, he was wearing a police uniform.
On the issue of why a province-wide emergency alert was not issued to people's cell phones and TVs, the RCMP said this.
It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at this moment. We'll be looking at that, and I hope to have a more fulsome response for you tomorrow.
What is so painfully clear and out in the open now is the grief. From RCMP detachments to flagpoles, in homes and in hearts, with more to come.
You really do see those signs of grieving everywhere, certainly in communities across Nova Scotia and by all means online. There's been a real outpouring of support and people trying to feel connected and together during all of this here in this province and indeed right across the country. Of course, the difficulty is we are in the middle of a global pandemic and COVID-19 with all the restrictions on people's dealings and who they can hang out with and how closely they can be with people. That is very difficult indeed. In fact, even today, the Premier of Nova Scotia, Stephen MacNeil, made a point of saying that the restrictions that this province has put in place similar to many in other provinces of Canada as well, for small gatherings, no larger than 5 people in a gathering will hold. So for those families who are now faced with trying to plan, wakes or funerals or memorial services, this is a very difficult time, a time when they want to be as close as they can be to their family. And of course, they have to be that way, but be apart as well. And that is really weighing heavy on a lot of people's minds, you can bet, here in Nova Scotia tonight.
Tom, thank you. Tom Murphy is the anchor for CBC Nova Scotia News. Let's talk more about those who were killed. We've heard the most about Constable Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year veteran of the force. The RCMP says she was killed yesterday morning while responding to the call about an active shooter. The CBC's Susanna De Silva is tracking the stories of all those who lost their lives in this tragedy. She joins me now. Susanna, let's start with Constable Stephenson.
Yeah, as you mentioned, 23 years she served the RCMP, a mother of 2 young children. She served for a time as police spokesperson for the RCMP as well, being remembered as a kind, friendly, loving person. And as you saw there with Tom, that all of the tributes are pouring in at the RCMP detachment and various locations, or people are coming, trying to show their support and remembering her for all that she did for the community and that she died serving that community. One young man who came out to bring flowers to one of those tributes. He knew her family. Her husband was his teacher. He was on the same swim club as her 2 children, and he remembers her as a kind person, always smiling, always friendly. And like many people in that community now, he is trying to come to grips and try to understand and process exactly what has happened to someone who was such a visible and open part of that community.
She was caring, compassionate, fun-loving, and I didn't know her as well as I wish I did, but that's what I know about her. Was every time I saw her, either in uniform or out of uniform, she had a smile on her face and cheering her kids on and, just doing what she loved in life.
Other members of the RCMP remembering her as a good colleague, a good neighbor, a good friend, and that she was always someone who was ready to lend a helping hand whenever it was needed.
And friends and relatives have been paying tribute to some of the other victims on social media. What can you confirm about them?
Yeah, of course, there are a lot of names that are out there. We are only going with the names that we have been able to be sure that family members know. They've received the information, received that notification to know what has happened to their family members. So I'll take you through some of the other ones that we can confirm, including a family of 3 that were killed together this weekend. Jolene Oliver, who was 40 years old, Aaron Tuck was 45, and their 17-year-old daughter, Emily. Now, they had moved to Nova Scotia 2 years ago to be close to Aaron Tuck's mother, who was ill. They eventually inherited his family home. And Jolene's sister saying that they lived at the end of a winding lane, a quiet home. They never locked their doors, and that home was often filled with the music of 17-year-old Emily, who played the violin. Here's one of the videos, the last videos posted of her playing that violin while the family was together there. Because of COVID-19, everybody was home together, that she was very close to graduating at the end of this year, that she had so much love, she was so smart, so caring, so humble, and that she had so much potential to live for that she now will not be able to do, and that her aunt rather, takes some comfort in knowing that the family did spend their last few weeks together because of COVID, that they were all home enjoying walks together, enjoying Emily's music. So that does provide some comfort. Now, some of the other victims that we know at this point, Sean McLeod and Alana Jenkins. Both of them worked for Correctional Service Canada. Now, neighbors heard explosions at their home and gunfire, and that led to a neighbor going to see what was going on. And that neighbor, unfortunately, then succumbed to injuries that he suffered during this killing. His daughter, Tom Bagley's daughter, posting on Facebook that her dad died trying to help others, that this beautiful soul was taken from me so unnecessarily. I can't even comprehend it. She wrote that he died trying to help, which if you knew him, you knew that was just who he was all of the time. I know he meant something to so many people. We also know Lillian Hislop. She was apparently just out for a walk at the time. And another couple, Greg and Jamie Blair, were also victims in this tragedy. And we're continuing to learn more about just what they have left behind and what they had contributed to their communities, and the void that all of their friends, their family members, everyone who knew them are now experiencing and trying to come to grips with.
All right, Susanna De Silva, thank you so much. There are still more stories to be told, and we will tell them to you in the next hour. We'll continue to focus on the people who were killed in this tragedy, but we're also keeping an eye on the investigation itself. What happened? Why? The RCMP is now bringing in, as we speak, national resources to assist in the investigation. Public Safety Minister Bill Blair spoke with my colleague Vashi Capellos earlier tonight.
We're mobilizing resources from across Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada and across the country to make sure that the RCMP have the resources they need to do this very important investigation. It's also very important to recognize, Vashi, that we're in the very earliest hours and days of this investigation. It's complex. It covers, as you know, at least 16 separate crime scenes over a 50-kilometer area. The RCMP have a great deal of work to do. They're working diligently, and they're working through their own grief.
Joining me now in Ottawa to discuss the challenges of this investigation is Phil Gursky. He is a former strategic analyst for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He is now the president of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting. Phil, welcome to you.
Thanks, Carol.
Phil, first of all, what's your reaction when you heard what happened in Nova Scotia and the scope of it?
Just tremendous grief. I mean, it started out as an active shooter late Saturday evening, and then as Sunday progressed, we learned it was more. You know, and the body count kept going up. And I'll tell you, Carol, you know, we were all consumed with COVID-19 and you know, social distancing and that kind of thing. And to have this unspeakable tragedy happen in the midst of this, there's no words to describe this. Thankfully, this is still relatively rare in Canada. That doesn't help right now to the families and friends in Nova Scotia, but it's devastating. Okay,
let's talk about the police angle. What kinds of resources will investigators likely need to bring in?
Well, there's no question, you know, the suspect is dead. So we know we believe he's the perpetrator, he is the gunman. So that part is pretty well covered. There'll be some ballistics to figure out how many shots were fired. There'll obviously be forensic specialists to look at bodies. I understand the body count is still perhaps a bit of flux, maybe bodies found in the houses that were burned out. And I think most importantly is to get to the why. And the only way we're going to find out why is to talk to people who knew him, things that may have been said or posted online the last few days. I would like to see if, you know, people looking at his computer, if he had those devices, did he post anything? Did he say anything? And in the best case scenario, did he leave a manifesto, which we've seen in this is not a terrorist attack, but in terrorist attacks in the past, we've seen manifestos led, which might give us insight into motivation.
And how did he create this fake identity as a police officer?
Wow, yeah, it's a really great question, right? I mean, it kind of, I think, stemmed naturally from what I understand. It was his obsession with law enforcement that apparently began when he was in high school in Nova Scotia. So it wouldn't have seemed as out of the ordinary to his friends and acquaintances because he was always kind of that guy. And, you know, what was behind it and how it led to the events of Saturday and Sunday, what snapped inside of him, I think is the you know, $64 million question. And that's one we have to try and solve right now.
Yeah. How will these investigations be conducted? Do you think, you know, you said ballistics to some extent, interviews to some extent. Take us through it and the complexity of dealing with 16 crime scenes and counting.
Yeah, as the minister said, this is a tremendously large crime scene, over 50 kilometers in Nova Scotia. You know, if I compare it to the investigations that I would have been party to when I was at CSIS, it's all about multiplicity of sources. You know, you have technical sources. So in this case, you look at, you know, his computer records and maybe any kind of social media posts. You have human sources, people that knew him, friends, family, co-workers, people in the neighborhood that can maybe lend some kind of insight into what he did. And the important thing in any investigation, be it a CSIS investigation or a RCMP investigation, is corroborate. Multiple sources that give you some insight, because any one source is not always reliable. So you want to get as many sources as you possibly can to fill out the picture to the best of your ability.
And the picture of what happened that night. So what kind of resources would have been available the night of?
Wow, yeah. Again, I think because of the tremendous geographic footprint of the attacks, you know, you're not going to have CCTV surveillance, right? You're not going to necessarily have that type of photographic evidence. They're going to have to try and piece together where he was, when he was, and then look for eyewitnesses or people that were somehow maybe caught something. And again, I go back to people that maybe had known him And that we've seen in other investigations where attackers actually gave some kind of indication they were planning something. It's called leakage, which it's happened in terrorism cases. Is that did he say something which, you know, as an afterthought, we think, wow, he actually meant it. He actually, you know, he was telling us what he was going to do. So it's those types of things to try to reconstruct where was he in the days and weeks prior to what happened in Nova Scotia? And, you know, did we miss some signals? Because unfortunately, even the best law enforcement, security intelligence, you know, we don't always get it right.
Yeah, we knew he had an RCMP uniform. We're not particularly sure, although there's been some video of him in the red serge. We're also looking at this idea that he had a vehicle, an RCMP vehicle, that must have been hidden somewhere. Maybe somebody saw it.
Well, exactly. From what I gather, Carol, from what I've heard, is that he was into refurbishing old police cars. So again, that would have not struck your average person as abnormal. This is what this kind of guy did. But again, going to people and saying, here's the vehicle, do you recall seeing it at this location at this time, to help the RCMP to piece together as much information as they can going forward to understand. And at this point, we're looking at sort of helping the families understand it, right? Because you're not going to prosecute the guy, he's dead, but it's doing what you can to give people answers. And the worst case scenario, Carol, I hate to say it, is that we may never get those answers. He may have gone, you know, the answers may have gone to the grave with him. We may not figure out his motivation.
Understood. Phil, thank you.
My pleasure, Carol.
Phil Gursky is a former strategic analyst for the Canadian Security Intelligence Service. He is now the president of Borealis Threat and Risk Consulting, and we reached him in Ottawa tonight. MPs were in the House of Commons today, albeit in much fewer numbers because of COVID-19. Following question period, they paid tribute to the victims and the affected communities in Nova Scotia. Coming up, we'll bring you the latest reaction from our nation's capital. You're watching special coverage of the tragedy in Nova Scotia on CBC News Network. Back in a moment.
I ask all the members to rise for a moment of silence.
Hello once again, everyone. I'm Carole MacNeil. You're watching special coverage of the worst mass shooting in Canadian history. Several communities in Nova Scotia are grieving tonight, and we don't even know the full extent of the situation. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau spoke about the tragedy in Nova Scotia during his daily press briefing this morning.
We are a country that stands united in our effort to defeat a pandemic, to save lives, and to help each other make it to a better day. But yesterday, we were jolted from that common cause by the senseless violence and tragedy in Nova Scotia. A gunman claimed the lives of at least 18 people. Among them, a woman in uniform, whose job it is to protect lives even if it endangers her own, Constable Heidi Stevenson of the RCMP. Constable Stephenson died protecting others. She was answering the call of duty, something she had done every day when she went to work for 23 years. This happened in small towns. Portapique, Truro, Milford, and Enfield are places where people have deep roots, places where people know their neighbours and look out for one another. There, everyone knows a Mountie because they're everything from police officers to social workers to teen counsellors. Now these communities are in mourning, and Canada is in mourning with them. To the grandparent who lost a child, to the children who lost a parent, to the neighbour who lost a friend, we are so sorry for your loss. Such a tragedy should have never occurred. Violence of any kind has no place in Canada. We stand with you and we grieve with you, and you can count on our government's full support during this incredibly painful time. Hier, au moins 18 personnes ont perdu la vie à la suite d'une fusillade survenue en Nouvelle-Écosse, plongeant des familles et leurs proches en deuil. Aux grands-parents qui ont perdu un enfant, aux enfants qui ont perdu un parent, aux voisins qui ont perdu des amis, mes pensées et les pensées de tous les Canadiens vous accompagnent. Une telle tragédie n'aurait jamais dû se produire. La violence n'a jamais sa place dans notre pays. Nous partageons votre deuil. Nous sommes de tout cœur avec vous alors que vous vivez des moments extrêmement douloureux. I also want to wish a full and speedy recovery to all those injured, including another RCMP officer. Canada is a vast and sweeping country filled with long stretches of lonely roads. With unwavering courage and compassion, our Royal Canadian Mounted Police patrol these roads to keep us safe, as they have for over 100 years. I know that from coast to coast to coast, the women and men who wear the red serge in service to Canada are grieving deeply the loss of one of their own and one of our best. This tragedy is a painful reminder of the risks all of our first responders take to keep us safe, of the sacrifices they make every single day to protect our communities. Paramedics, doctors, nurses, firefighters, and police officers, they're always here for us. They've been stepping up through the pandemic, and yesterday in Nova Scotia, they showed that bravery. I want to take a moment to thank them all for their professionalism and their courage. Many of you are already working overtime because of this pandemic. Our communities need you now more than ever, and I know that can weigh on you at times. These are exceptional circumstances, yet you did what you always do. You ran towards danger. Without pause, without hesitation, you put your life on the line on behalf of all Canadians. Thank you for your service.
That was the Prime Minister speaking this morning outside of Rideau Cottage. Cheers and shouts of thank you today for Constable Chad Morrison. He is the RCMP officer who was wounded during a shooting spree. He was seen with his arm bandaged, waving to the crowd as he was welcomed by his family. You're watching CBC News Network.
In any incident such as this, we always have to look back at what we did. Nobody can lose their life in vain, and Heidi will not lose her life in vain, nor will the 17 other victims.
The commissioner of the RCMP says it will take some time before we know how each of the victims died. There are at least 18 of them now. Investigations underway at 16 crime scenes across Nova Scotia. Police say the suspect was able to move around the province easily, in part because he was pretending to be a police officer in a vehicle that looks much like the one you're looking at now. Investigators now need to determine what weapons may have been used at each of the locations. Police are also warning that more people may have been killed. Authorities believe the gunman traveled 50 kilometers. They believe he knew some of the victims and others appear more random. All of them in a rural stretch of Nova Scotia's North Shore, not far from the capital, Halifax. Let's go to Halifax now, and the CBC's Preston Mulligan. Preston, police were called early Sunday morning. Take us through what happened.
Well, good evening, Carol. Wentworth, Nova Scotia, as you said, 55 kilometers north of Portapique. At 8 o'clock Sunday morning, people who live along the Hunter Road in Wentworth heard gunfire and a loud explosion, and then flames coming from their friend's home down that dirt road. I spoke with Lisa Owen and her husband Daryl Turrier this morning in their front yard, and they tell me that when they heard all that noise, they immediately walked that half-kilometer down the dirt road to their neighbor's home just to see what was going on. The house was on fire, fully engulfed in flames at that point. The fire trucks had responded, but police told them to stay away from the burning house and the property that it sits on. Eventually, though, that morning, the couple made their way to the home and they found another friend and neighbor. His name is Tom Bagley, lying dead about 20 meters from that burnt out home.
I called 911 to report it, obviously. 911 took all my information, all the information about the deceased, and then they patched me through to EHS, who wanted me to go over and see if there was any life, do they need an ambulance to come? But they were asking me all those type of questions. So I had to go over and look at him and tell them and verify that, there was no signs of life.
Now, operators at 911 also told Lisa Owen to go home, not to tell any of her neighbors what they witnessed, not even the family of Tom Bagley, who Lisa Owen knew very well. We know that Tom Bagley, he's a retired firefighter from the area, and the couple I spoke with say that despite his good intentions, it appears that Mr. Bagley was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, the owners of the home were Alana Jenkins and Sean McLeod. They're among the deceased in this. CBC News here in Halifax spoke with Sean McLeod's daughter, who said that her father knew the armed assailant, who was also dead, but she didn't elaborate on that relationship. So there are so many questions about this horrible tragedy, the main one being why. In this particular case in Wentworth, why did the shooter drive from one tiny village in rural Nova Scotia, Portapique, 55 kilometers north to another small community to go to that particular home to wreak such havoc? It's just one of the terrifying details here. And what's more is this is just, Carol, just one of 16 crime scenes that local RCMP now have the monumental task of investigating to find out exactly what happened.
Yes, and the RCMP from the rest of the country will be moving in quickly. They're mobilizing now to help them starting tonight. The CBC's Preston Mulligan in Halifax tonight. Preston, thank you. A moment of silence today in the House of Commons to honor the lives lost in Nova Scotia over the weekend. At least 18 people killed, including RCMP officer Heidi Stevenson, in a series of incidents over the weekend. The gunman is dead. The RCMP confirms 16 crime scenes as part of their investigation. Officers warning there may be more victims as some of those crime scenes still need to be processed. For more on the reaction from Ottawa, I'm joined by the CBC's Evan Dyer from his home in Chelsea, Quebec. Evan, how are parliamentarians reacting today to what happened?
Well, we've seen a lot of reaction, Carol, and all of it obviously very sad and very shocked. This comes in the middle of a major debate, actually, in Parliament about COVID-19 and about how Parliament should begin or continue to operate through the whole COVID-19 crisis. This morning, we saw the Prime Minister come out at Rideau Cottage, as is his daily habit during the whole coronavirus crisis. He didn't talk about that, though. He talked rather about the events in Nova Scotia. He referred very briefly to what's been going on in Parliament, this fight over procedure, saying he didn't want to argue with anyone today. Rather, he wanted to talk to and about what had happened to the people of Nova Scotia and about what had happened in Nova Scotia. So let's watch a little bit of the statement that he made later in the day in the House of Commons.
Who has the words to ease our sorrow? Because there are no words for the pain their families and loved ones feel today. But I want them to know that all Canadians are with them, that this senseless, evil act will not define Nova Scotia, that today all Canadians are Nova Scotian.
So he was pressed, as was Bill Blair, Public Safety Minister, about the issues that arose from this shooting, some of the questions that people have about how the shooter was able to obtain a police car and police uniforms, and several other issues. But the government is stressing that the investigation is in its very early stages and really staying away from those kinds of conclusions until the RCMP can advance a little bit further in finding out exactly why and how this was able to happen.
What's the opposition saying, Evan?
Well, the opposition, of course, has been very divided as well over these issues during the last few days, with a lot of tension on Parliament Hill about how Parliament's going to operate. But we did see them briefly set those aside today, and we saw all of the parties address what had happened in Nova Scotia. A poem from the Greens, some very moving words from Paul Manley from Vancouver Island, also from Yves-François Blanchet of the Bloc. But let's look at Conservative leader Andrew Scheer and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh talking about these events.
A killer has taken the lives of at least 19 people, each one of them a tragic loss for families and friends. As the RCMP uncover the details of this senseless loss, our thoughts, prayers, and support are with the communities reeling from the fallout of these tragic events.
The past several weeks, we've seen the courage of first responders in the face of COVID-19, those who are running to harm's way to keep us safe. And now we've got an example of RCMP constable who did exactly that, ran towards the fire, ran towards harm to save the lives of others, and in saving the lives of others, lost hers.
So Jagmeet Singh there obviously talking about Constable Heidi Stevenson, the RCMP officer killed in this attack. You know, much of the procedure of the House today was taken up with this pretty acrimonious debate about how to keep Parliament running through COVID-19. We saw about 36 MPs in the House today, and some very tense words between the parties, with a division between the Conservatives on one side, who want to have more in-person sittings, and the Liberals and the other opposition parties entrenched very much on the other side, wanting to make the House as virtual as possible. One thing that some members noted was that members of Atlantic Canada were particularly absent from the House today. In fact, there were no members from Nova Scotia that we could see in the House today. And this is one of the things that's causing tension on the Hill. People from different parts of the country are affected differently by COVID-19. And in the case of MPs from Nova Scotia, although if anybody should be in the House today, it would be them, one would think, they can't attend, because if they come to Ottawa, they'll then be quarantined for 14 days on their return to Nova Scotia, unable to work, unable to be even with their families. So it's a reminder that this tragedy, this mass murder in Nova Scotia, one of the worst in Canadian history, is happening in the shadow of another tragedy, an even deadlier tragedy that continues.
The CBC's Evan Dyer in Chelsea, Quebec. For more, I want to bring in someone with deep roots in Nova Scotia. Peter Mackay spent 18 years as an MP from the province, Central Nova, which is next door to where this happened. Burt is about 45 minutes from New Glasgow. He served as a minister in Stephen Harper's cabinet, including as Justice Minister, and he was a part of the Crown Prosecutor's Office as well in Nova Scotia. Peter Mackay joins me now from Toronto. Peter, welcome to you.
Thank you, Carol. And I know you have deep roots in that part of the world as well. And we're all heartbroken, and our thoughts are certainly back home with our friends, our neighbors, and people who are suffering in the extreme as a result of this act of violence that came so suddenly.
That is absolutely true. What are your thoughts? What went through your mind when you heard about what happened and when it became clear the scope of what happened?
Well, it was very chilling, to be honest, Carol. I received a call early yesterday morning from Scott Armstrong, who I believe may have been speaking to you earlier. And Scott is a school principal in Burt and had heard, of course, almost immediately of the initial murder of a school teacher in the area. And then, of course, there was great uncertainty, panic in the community. And so I could hear that in his voice immediately. And then we started getting more reports coming, and the devastation over, 100 kilometers or more, different communities, having sightings. And that part of the world, as you know, is very close-knit. Communities are small, are peaceful, are tranquil. This is the antithesis of what one would expect where people leave their doors open at night. They leave their keys in their car. So there is a tremendous shock and trauma being felt back home. And, the grieving and the reaction has just been so overwhelming and emotional.
Yeah, I've also heard anger as well. People wanted to know why they weren't alerted.
Frustration, I think, and information travels in a void very quickly. And the reaction, of course, nobody had, nor could they anticipate the moving, rolling nature of this individual. And they're very deliberate. The mocking up of a police car and a uniform, a trusted symbol in the community, being used against people's sense of security, going door to door, the houses that were set on fire. I mean, it was such extreme carnage being wreaked by a single individual. And there's no understanding the depravity of this. Yeah. And yet what I do know, Carol, and you understand well, is the resilience of the people of Atlantic Canada. The people of Nova Scotia will recover. As devastating as this is, the outpouring of support from one end of the province to the other, but right across the country, it helps in a time like this. But I heard some of the earlier commentary, which is correct, that due to COVID-19, those normal human reactions to bring food, to gather, to come together, to embrace the unspoken part of support that's felt in a community in a time of tragedy, it can't happen in the same way. And it's equally difficult for people who are trying to demonstrate that outpouring of support from neighboring communities. It's so challenging right now because of this extraordinary time in which we're living. And we've clearly never seen anything like this at any time in our history, from the West Ray mine to Spring Hill to places where in Cape Breton, where we've had terrible tragedies. This is such an extreme act of violence, of madness.
Yeah, it's every rural Canadian's worst nightmare playing out before our eyes in Nova Scotia.
It is, and
I mean, it's everyone's nightmare, but when you're in, as you know, when you're in a rural part of the country, you don't have the same speed of access that people in a bigger city might.
Oh, that's correct. And the distances that one has to travel to get the aid that is required, those emergency responders, got there as quickly as possible. But, this individual had obviously put a lot of thought, as twisted as it is. There was a tremendous amount of premeditation, and then coupled with random acts of violence. And we'll never be able to make any rhyme or reason of what happened. And comments with respect to the RCMP and Heidi Stevenson in particular, of her heroics and selfless act, this is going to resonate and really ripple through our province, our country for a very, very long time. There'll be lots of time for the forensics and the necessary examination of circumstance and what we can do to prevent. But for now, it's a sense of grieving, it's a sense of coming together, of support, and really demonstrating to those who've lost loved ones that the country cares, that the community is with them.
The other thing is how people were apparently duped by this individual in a police car, in a police uniform, and there is a strong relationship of trust between the RCMP and rural areas of this nation. So people would not have seen what happened, what transpired coming.
No, of course, and because this was such an extreme act of violence, and that's not something we associate with our protectors, our first responders, our RCMP. And that was used in a very psychotic way against that trusting nature and against the very peaceful, tranquil place that people have grown to love and call home. And this is it's a dagger to the heart of that trusting, caring, loving nature that people have in rural Canada. And so one can only speculate and hope that this will not have irreparable consequences. We know that These are different, dangerous times. We know that mental health issues are rampant in some communities, in some places, and yet we've got to address this every way that we can. But right now, the focus is on the victims and the families and those that have lost loved ones. And so much pain, such a senseless act of violence. One cannot imagine the suffering that people are feeling right now.
Peter Mackay, thank you for taking the time to join me to talk about this from Toronto.
Thank you, Carol.
You're watching special coverage of the tragedy in Nova Scotia. You're watching CBC News Network. Back in a moment. Nova Scotians and other Canadians are coming together to mourn and pay tribute to those who died in that vicious attack on the weekend. Fellow Nova Scotian Hannah Thibodeau has been tracking this part of the story. Hannah, how are people coming to grips with what's happened?
Well, Carol, you know as well as I do, these are extremely tight-knit communities. Sometimes they're communities of just 100, but all Nova Scotians are touched by what they saw happen over this weekend. The people who were killed in this tragic incident. And in fact, the first person who was identified was Corporal Heidi Stevenson. Here are some photos of her. She, of course, a veteran of the force. She had 2 young children. And today, officers and just everyday people, residents, lined up for a procession as Constable Stephenson's body was taken to the RCMP Nova Scotia headquarters. You can see that there. And in the next still, you can see that just everyday people came out to pay their tributes to Constable Stephenson, and of course as well recognizing that physical distancing while doing so. There were also makeshift memorials, and we'll show you some of those where people just came. They started to bring flowers. We see some veterans there just bringing flowers, paying tribute, also just having a moment to reflect in silence. Now, Constable Chad Morrison, he's the other constable, and we'll see him in a second. That's still those makeshift memorials. Constable Chad Morrison was, there he is there. He was the other constable who was injured during this. But something really neat happened. He was released from the hospital today. You can see him there. He arrived at home. But let me show you this video. It was a Nova Scotia woman who organized a roadside tribute for the officer. And people lined up along the route. Look at this. And then you see him in one of the vehicles there. People from the community, they waved, some were crying, they were all saying thank you. So Constable Morrison would know that the whole community was absolutely behind him. And again, we'll show you, look, just how long that line of people are clapping alongside of the road. That's what Nova Scotians do. I know everybody across Canada are also thinking the same thing. Here's a picture of Constable Morrison at home. He was waving his arm, showing that he is happy to be recovering at home. And this is a photo he put up on Facebook earlier today. He posted this picture, and in that note, he said he's doing well, and he's overwhelmed by the calls, the messages, the cards, the flowers, the cookies, the condolences, and offers to help. In it, he says, for anybody who's worried about me, there is no need. He goes on to say, I'm okay, surrounded by love. I consider myself extremely lucky to be alive right now, and I'm grateful for everything I had. Let me show you another still here, Carol, and you will connect with this too. In the East Coast, when things like this happen, people want to deliver food, they want to bring coffee. And look, this resident made sure to come out and say thank you to the RCMP for all they did over the past weekend and continue to do now. They have to go back to those 16 sites and continue to investigate what's happening. And then let's go forward. Look at these hand-painted signs. Thank you notes, hearts. Everybody just saying thank you for being there. There we go. Pray for the police. So you can just see what the outpouring from Nova Scotians, and they're telling each other to stay strong. And look at that on a schoolyard there, a whole bunch of little hearts from kids too.
Right. I imagine Chad Morrison will never have to cook another cookie or a meal ever again.
Yep. Isn't that what everybody does in Nova Scotia? They cook meals in these hard times, but of course you have to physically distance as well. And that's another one of the tough things, Carol, is right now you can't go and you can't have those typical funerals that you would have to pay those respects to the loved ones that are lost. So there will be tribute on Friday. We don't have many details right now, but this is going to be a tribute via the internet somehow, but we will let people know as soon as we get those details.
Hannah, thank you.
Quite welcome.
I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see.
A rendition of Amazing Grace from Lily Alexander. She is a local artist from New Brunswick, sending her support to the people of Nova Scotia. She's one of many musicians offering comfort to people today online as loved ones and community members are not able to physically be together to grieve. Lily Alexander and Amazing Grace on CBC News Network.
Grace appeared the hour I first believed. Through many dangers, toils and snares, we have already come. 'Twas grace hath brought us safe thus.
structure fire. There's a person down there with a gun. They're still looking for him. It's very vague what's going on down there.
The national symbol of grief and loss, the Canadian flag flying at half-mast in Nova Scotia and the nation's capital tonight. Flying in honor of Nova Scotia and the many victims who died in one of the worst mass killings this country has ever seen. Good evening, everyone. I'm Carole MacNeil. This is CBC News Special. What happened in Nova Scotia this past weekend is every community's worst nightmare. A member of the community turning on his own fellow citizens with unimaginable viciousness. Let's begin in Nova Scotia. The anchor for CBC Nova Scotia News, Tom Murphy, is outside the RCMP detachment in Enfield, where there's a growing tribute to the victims. Tom.
Yeah, that's right, Carol. It's actually quite impressive. Over the last hour and a half or so, people have been coming here pretty much nonstop to drop off some flowers or to write a message on the flag behind me or to drop off a card. In fact, just a few moments ago, there was a smudging ceremony, which is something that a lot of Indigenous cultures will do. It's a service to represent or to recognize the spirits of those involved, and that's what we saw play out here just a few moments ago. So there's been things like that happening right across the province, and also a busy day, this first full day, I guess you could say, of investigation by the RCMP. Still a lot more questions than answers about what transpired, why it happened, and still trying to determine the number of people who have been directly affected by this, victims and family members alike. So that's really been a day that the RCMP tried to talk about, that this would be slow moving, that the investigation would take quite some time, not days or weeks, but months. Here is the latest on the investigation.
They are the fingerprints of a mass killer, the charred and leveled homes, the burned out cars, evidence of a crime spree that is now being meticulously combed through, a twisted puzzle that's spread over more than 90 kilometers. No fewer than 16 crime scenes, according to the RCMP.
We're relatively confident we've identified all the crime scenes. However, we've been unable to fully examine the crime scenes because, for instance, we have had 5 structure fires, most of those being residences, and we believe there may be victims still within the remains of those homes.
So that's 18 victims and counting, all adults. Their connection or their randomness to the killer still not clear.
The subject did know some of his victims, and yet others he did not know.
And the questions, they keep coming. Among them, the police uniform, or the facsimile thereof, the killer was wearing. Where did the shooter get it? Investigators don't know.
His ability to move around the province undetected was surely greatly benefited by the fact that he had a police or a vehicle that looked identical in every way to a marked police car. And beyond that, he was wearing a police uniform.
On the issue of why a province-wide emergency alert was not issued to people's cell phones and TVs, the RCMP said this.
It's a good question, and I don't have an answer for you at this moment. We'll be looking at that, and I hope to have a more fulsome response for you tomorrow.
What is so painfully clear and out in the open now is the grief. From RCMP detachments to flagpoles, in homes and in hearts, with more to come.
And we are expecting to see more in the coming days and weeks. Right now there's a virtual vigil that is planned for Friday night. That is sort of a hallmark of the times, really, isn't it, when you think about it, in these COVID-19 days in the middle of a global pandemic. Of course, large groups of people cannot get together. And so family members who are now trying to plan church services, wakes or funerals for the deceased really face a conundrum here at a time when they so want to be close to one another, when they want the strength of family nearby. Of course, we know that they cannot have these large gatherings. In fact, even today, the Premier of Nova Scotia gently reminded people that, in fact, there can be no more than 5 people at a gathering. So that means if someone was to hold a funeral in the near future, it could only be 5 people there. And that obviously is not something that the families want to hear. A good many people that we've heard from understand the conditions. Obviously, it's the world we live in right now, but it doesn't make this any easier. That is for sure, as the pain continues to be felt across Nova Scotia. Carol?
Tom, thank you. Tom Murphy is the anchor for CBC Nova Scotia News. There are so many questions, as Tom noted, that need answers. Maybe not today, but soon. What happened to all of the victims, including the RCMP officer who died? Did the police have the resources they needed? My colleague Vashi Capello's pressed Public Safety Minister Bill Blair on this point today.
Are you satisfied that RCMP officers involved had the equipment that they needed to deal with the situation?
Well, you know, I'm not going to engage in any conjecture or speculation. It's really important that the RCMP conduct this investigation and they do it thoroughly and we get all the facts. And as we've already said, it's very early in this investigation, but the RCMP is out there doing their job. And one of the things I learned after many years of conducting complex investigations is what you know in the first few hours is often incomplete and sometimes inaccurate. And so it's important that we give the RCMP the time to gather their evidence, to get to the truth of what has transpired, and then we will deal effectively with what that evidence tells us.
With respect, Minister, I'm not asking you to speculate. I'm asking based on past incidents, which up until last year was even highlighted by the Auditor General, in which carbines, for example, specifically, were not made available to RCMP officers to the degree that they should have been, nor was the training there for them on that equipment. I'm not saying I have any idea if that's the case here, but is that a question that you have at this point? Are you satisfied that they had what they needed?
Listen, Vashi, we examined very carefully what transpired in Moncton and in Fredericton and in Meyerthorpe and in other places where police officers have lost their lives. I'm absolutely certain that those factors and that evidence will be examined thoroughly in this case.
That was Public Safety Minister Bill Blair. He said authorities would be looking into whether the officers had the proper resources to deal with a mass killing in a rural part of Nova Scotia. For people there, this is a nightmare that is not over. A member of the community turning on their own in a 12-hour killing spree. Joining me from Surrey, BC to talk about policing in rural communities and the challenges is Doug Kylo. Doug is a former RCMP superintendent and also a former member of an emergency response team with the RCMP. Doug, welcome to you.
Thank you, and thanks for having me, and condolences to certainly the police members' family, the police community, and all the people of Nova Scotia.
What was your reaction when you heard about what happened and the scope of it?
I think probably with all police officers, there's the immediate shock and very disturbing facts coming in and concern for all the people you know, all the community, and as the events unfolded, concern that the individual would be contained and stopped as soon as possible.
And what is it like as a former member of the RCMP to hear that a member of the RCMP lost their lives?
Well, you're aware of 6 degrees of separation, and it's less. I know people who know these people personally. I know many of the people you've interviewed on air and that are working there personally. So it affects an individual with a much greater degree of shock and sadness, quite frankly.
Okay, with your experience, take us through it. What would have happened when that first call came in? And we heard just moments ago the scanner from that call that went to 911 saying it's a bad scene, we need help. As soon as they get that call that there is a shooter, what is the protocol?
Well, immediately, and I think it's been described as an active shooter. So immediately, police officers in the area, no matter what they're doing, are going to be heading towards that situation. They don't know what they're getting. All they have is information. All they can rely on is their training. And in this instance, again, they didn't have fact. They had information. Nothing had been confirmed. Nothing had been relayed to the oncoming members. They were going to trouble. And that's really all they needed to know, and it was a high-risk situation.
Okay. Would they have donned vests? Would they have prepared themselves for this particular situation? And if so, what would they have changed about how they would handle a regular call?
Well, there's a number of components to that question, obviously. With respect to equipment and vests, I would suspect that they are all wearing their body armor. However, depending on the capacity of the firepower that they're walking into, depending on the capacity of the individual, all of those factors would play in whether or not that protective equipment would be satisfactory to deal with the issue, as well as any location of any injury that it might be deploying. Yeah. With respect to the training, I would, as a 23-year member, Constable Stephenson would certainly have had some training with regards to this. Would be have her sidearm, likely a carbine, and other tools. But again, whether or not you get access to them, whether or not you can utilize them from a safe location, again, there's a number of details and facts that aren't in the public eye yet. And so I can't comment as to safety, logistics, how they actually responded, and the difficulty they faced.
Yeah, I guess one of the questions that we'll eventually be asking is how much what happened in Moncton and the killing of those 4 police officers changed the protocol on the ground in rural Nova Scotia.
Well, I would go back before Moncton, Mayor Thorpe, go back to the history of policing, and every shooting death of a police officer is reviewed in detail. It's shared amongst all police, what can be done, how we can be better prepared, what equipment might have helped, what is appropriate and what isn't. I can only assume that the lessons of Moncton or Mayor Thorpe or others have been heeded by all the members as they're aware of them, and they would address those. That doesn't mean that someone doesn't have to go in. That doesn't mean that we have to get the actual facts and we have to risk contact to find out the information. And knowing exactly where the suspect was, knowing exactly what the suspect had, is all information that is she likely didn't have, but was responding to save other people. That's what they do. That is what the first officers do. There is a high risk moment until they can identify the location and place of the individual and the safety and how they're going to deal with it.
All right. Doug Kylo, former RCMP superintendent, joining us from Surrey, British Columbia. Doug, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Those are just a few of the people who were killed in the mass shooting in Nova Scotia over the weekend. Police have chosen not to release the names of all those who were killed, but their friends and relatives have been paying tribute to them on social media. An RCMP constable, a family of 3, a teacher, correctional officers, and nurses are among those who died. Susanna De Silva is working on the stories of those victims. Susanna, let's begin with what we know about Lisa McCulley, a beloved teacher in her community.
Yeah, she taught grades 3 and 4, and those who know her describe her as someone who could just light up a room as soon as she walked into it. She was just that type of a person, that she was a dedicated mother, a dedicated teacher, that she was always concerned about others and was always an advocate for her students, especially any students that needed extra help. She was always there to advocate on their behalf, and that even though her classroom sat empty the last few weeks, like classrooms all across the country have, that she has been working harder than ever, that she was trying to make that connection with her students, with their parents, to keep their learning up, even though they're all forced to be at home, obviously, because of COVID-19. Her classroom still set up, waiting, all of the bits of things that she had left there, that she had done for her students. And of course, her colleagues are heartbroken. And remembering a teacher as someone, one of those ones who would always be the first one to volunteer. If something needed to be done in the school, she was that first one to offer her their help, and they're remembering her now.
I mean, who would have thought in our small rural communities in this area that we would have such a terrible, heinous act performed on so many families? And, you know, I mean, Lisa was just a fabulous person. She's was one of the most positive people I've ever met and worked with. And for this to happen to her and her family is just an absolute tragedy. And there are many families hurting in our communities right now, and our thoughts go to all of them.
And one of her friends spoke with CBC and said they'd had a conversation with her just over a week ago, and that she was trying to take the positive out of all that has happened because of COVID, being able to stay at home and spend that time with her children, aged 10 and 12, that they were making bread, that they were building mazes, that they were playing ukulele together, and that she was enjoying the time that she was able to spend with them. Memories now for her children to hang on to as they are left forced to grieve for their mother.
And Susanna, among the victims were 2 nurses.
Yes, 2 nurses. Kristen Beaton was one of them. She's a new wife and a mother. She'd been braving the COVID fight like so many healthcare workers across the country had. The Victorian Order of Nurses provided statements about the 2 women, talking about the fact that all of those frontline workers are heroes, and that 2 heroes were lost on the weekend in this senseless tragedy. About Beaton, they say Kristen Beaton was a continuing care assistant and a young wife and mother, that she began work with the VON nearly 6 years ago, and like Heather, was a caring, compassionate member of the VON team. And Heather O'Brien, a licensed practical nurse, wife, mother, and grandmother, that she shared her deep caring of others as a VON nurse for nearly 17 years. An obituary for her, remembering her as a Sunday school teacher, as someone who loved children. And on Facebook, her daughter saying that her mother was murdered by a monster, and that she was a kind and beautiful woman. And of course, we will continue to learn more over the coming days, these bits and pieces that paint pictures of lives that contributed so much to their communities and the void that has been left behind. And now these communities and families who are struggling to remember them in a way like we've never had to do before because of COVID-19, to come together without actually coming together and to remember all of these lives lost.
Carol? Susanna, thank you. People in Nova Scotia and across Canada have been mourning the loss of those killed in the mass shooting. And during this time, many people in the community may have difficulty coping. Michael Ungar is the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family and Community Resilience. He's a professor of social work at Dalhousie University, and he joins me now from Halifax to discuss coping and building resilience in a community after something like this. Michael, first of all, as somebody sitting there in Nova Scotia, what was your reaction when you first heard about the news in Nova Scotia?
To tell you the truth, like most of the people, I'm sure, on my street and my neighborhood, it was complete disbelief. We don't see ourselves as this kind of thing happening here. It's not part of our identity. We don't think of these kinds of things being local. We're more the kind of people that go over and help each other out during a crisis. That's kind of what holds our communities together. I know the communities where this is originally from. They're small, they're very tight-knit, they're very beautiful. This is not, that was sort of the shock. I think everyone has been swapping emails and texts all day long trying to figure out how could this be happening here? It's not us. It just doesn't feel right.
Yeah, and I imagine the other confusion is this was a member of our nearby community. This was a fellow Nova Scotian who exhibited, as far as anybody can tell, no indication that he would be capable of this.
No, and that's what I think it's just taking everybody a moment to pause, and it's challenging us to think about who we are and how we know our neighbors. But at the same time, I think what it's also doing is it seems to be drawing people very quickly to assert that, this does not represent who we are. And this is people with the limits of the pandemic, of course, that there's not that same ability to sort of come out of our homes and reclaim the space around us to say, this is not what Nova Scotians are. This is not what draws people here as tourists, or indeed why people often choose to live here, especially in our smaller communities. But I do get the sense that people will get back to that. It's far too early. We don't understand why this happened, but this was somebody that had a lot of contact. And I feel very much, even myself, that we're all going to be like just 1 degree of separation from somebody we know, which of course is going to bring that tragedy right into most of our families and our homes.
What are some of the steps that a community can take to cope and build resilience in the wake of this tragedy, considering that people can't hug each other unless they're in the same house?
I study resilience in communities, and I've worked with other communities where major problems, wildfires, businesses closing, I've done all that. And I can honestly say that there is not any research where you have 2 huge problems occurring at the same time. And we do know that risks, like, they accumulate, they Velcro together so that you have this huge exponential growth in the stress that people are going to experience. But with that said, we do know that communities that come through this, they take back their public spaces. They honor themselves and those they've lost through memorials, which I know Colchester County is going to be doing something like that online. We also, by the way, reassert structure. We try and get back into our routines. Again, that's very complicated with the pandemic. But we also know that as we look after each other, even if it's just from a distance, it's getting that feeling that you're connected to a neighbor through a shout out as you're walking around the neighborhood. Anything that we can do to get us back into our routines, make us feel accountable again to others, and perhaps to reassure ourselves and others that we're safe. And go and talk to a police officer, talk to a first responder, do anything that reasserts that we are still cohesive and that we can draw some kind of meaning out of this.
Yeah, often in times like this, and I've noticed, we just saw the pictures of people bringing flowers, paying their respects, leaving them at a safe, respectful distance outside of the RCMP, outside of people's homes, also leaving food for people to be picked up, of course, at a respectable distance, recognizing that we're still in the time of COVID-19. What role do these things play in the lives of people who are trying to put their lives back together?
Well, one, they convey, of course, that support to people who are experiencing this firsthand. But we do know from lots of other research on communities that have gone through some sort of tragedy that anything we can do to express gratitude for the small things that we still have that are something special about us. And in that reaching out and showing caring, it makes, of course, it's for the people that we're helping. I don't want to make light of that, but it does also pay back. It also means that we feel some control. We gain that sense that we can do something again for a situation like that.
Right. Michael, thank you so much. Michael Unger speaking with us from Halifax.
In any incident such as this, we always have to look back at what we did. Nobody can lose their life in vain, and Heidi will not lose her life in vain, nor will the 17 other victims.
The commissioner of the RCMP saying it will take some time before we know how each of the victims died. There are at least 18 of them now. Investigations are underway at 16 crime scenes across Nova Scotia with help from RCMP from across the nation. Police say the suspect was able to move around the province easily, in part because he was pretending to be a police officer in a vehicle just like the one you were seeing there. Investigators now need to determine what weapons may have been used at each of the locations. Police are also warning that the death toll may rise. Authorities believe the gunman traveled 50 kilometers. They believe he knew some of the victims and others appear more random. All of them in a rural stretch of Nova Scotia's North Shore, not far from the capital of Halifax. In fact, let's go to Halifax now. And the CBC's Preston Mulligan. Preston, police were called early Sunday morning. Take us through what happened.
Hi, Carol. Yeah, well, we'll take you to Wentworth, Nova Scotia. It's about 55 kilometers north of Portapique. At 8 o'clock on Sunday morning, people who live along the Hunter Road in Wentworth, they heard gunfire and a loud explosion. Hunter Road is a very sparsely populated road, not a lot of people there. The people heard flames. They saw the flames coming from their friend's home just down that dirt road. I spoke with Lisa Owen and her husband Daryl Turrier this morning in their front yard, and they told me they heard all the noise and they immediately walked about a half kilometer to their neighbor's home to see what was going on. When they got there, they saw that the house was on fire, fully engulfed in flames. There were fire trucks that had responded, but were going nowhere near the flames or the home. Police told them just to stay away. It's an active shooter scene. Eventually, later that morning, the couple did make their way to the home, and they found another friend of theirs, a neighbor, Tom Bagley. He was lying dead about 20 meters from the burnt-out home.
Called 911 to report it, obviously. 911 took all my information, all the information about the deceased, and then they patched me through to EHS, who wanted me to go over and see if there was any life, do they need an ambulance to come? They were asking me all those type of questions. So I had to go over and look at him and tell them and verify that, there was no signs of life.
Now, operators at 911 also told Lisa Owen to go home after that and not tell any of her neighbors what they witnessed, not even the family of Tom Bagley, who we know is a retired firefighter from the area. And the couple I spoke with say that despite Tom Bagley's good intentions, it appears that he was simply in the wrong place at the wrong time. Now, the owners of that home were Alana Jenkins and Sean McLeod. They're among the deceased. CBC News here in Halifax has spoken with Sean McLeod's daughter, who said that her father knew the armed assailant, who was also dead, but she didn't elaborate on that relationship, how they knew each other. So among the so many questions here, Carol, about this horrible tragedy, one of them is why? Why did the shooter drive from one tiny village in rural Nova Scotia, Portapique, 55 kilometers north to another small community to wreak such havoc there? And just one of the terrifying details here is that this home that we showed you, the burnt out home, is one of 16 crime scenes that local RCMP now have that monumental task of investigating. Carol.
Preston, thank you. The CBC's Preston Mulligan in Halifax tonight. Let's check in with national co-host Adrian Arsenault. Adrian, what are you working on for tonight's show?
Well, hi, good evening, Carol. I think, like everyone, we're trying to sort of wrap our heads around the cruelty of this, because Nova Scotians were in their homes, in the places that we're all told are the safest places for us to be right now. And so for them to be then effectively hunted in those homes is unfathomable. So we have several teams working on this tonight. Ioana Meliodas and producer Melissa Mancini are trying to put together the story of the lives lost, how these people lived, how they loved. They have to come first. So that's a huge focus for us tonight. We're also trying to understand the timeline, Carol, because, as you know, this was some 12 hours of killing that happened. And as unprecedented as this is for Canada, this is also really unusual for mass shootings, period. I think some 70% of mass shootings are over within half an hour or so. So this is really unusual. And yes, this man is gone. This gunman is dead. That doesn't mean this is over, because police really need to spend some time with his computer and with his cell phone to try to understand the motive, and crucially to try to understand, were there warning signs that were missed? You know, those are questions for the days ahead. Crucially tonight, we're going to try to figure out too, how do people mourn in this moment? You know, it's another of the cruelties that at the very point where people need embraces, they can't have them. So how are people going to be able to feel the love that is certainly surrounding them from, you know, certainly 37 million Canadian hearts tonight? But there are some real practical questions for the people of Nova Scotia tonight.
Adrienne, thank you. Adrienne Arsenault is the co-host of The National. You can watch The National right here on CBC News Network, coming up at 9 o'clock Eastern Time. Nova Scotia's Premier spoke about the shooting today during his province's daily COVID-19 update. Stephen MacNeil says he knows how upset Nova Scotians are and how much they want to be together. But he also urged residents to continue to respect physical distancing rules, even at this difficult time.
On behalf of the people of Nova Scotia, I want to extend our deepest sympathies to everyone impacted by yesterday's tragedy. We now have more information about the number of victims, who they were, and who they left behind, and how their contributions that they made to their friends, their families, and indeed to our province. The heart behind us has meaning. It's about our love for each other. It's about strength. And it's about getting through this together. It is a critical time for us to find a way to mourn, to find a way to heal from a distance.
We want to show you another tribute to Nova Scotia, this one from Toronto. The CN Tower is lighting up in blue and white, the colors of Nova Scotia's flag, in honor of the victims of yesterday's tragedy. And on the quarter hour and half hour, and I think you'll see it there as well, the tower will be lit red, blue, and gold to honor, those are the colors of the RCMP, and that's to honor the RCMP officer who was killed in the line of duty, Constable Heidi Stevenson, a 23-year veteran of the force. You're watching special coverage of the Nova Scotia tragedy right here on CBC News Network.
The best way that we can honor the victims of this tragedy is to continue to act in a way that protects our fellow Nova Scotians. And perhaps another way is to honor them is something that I've seen online. A Nova Scotia tartan scarf tied around a tree. Or if you don't have tartan, the suggestion is a blue ribbon.
Nova Scotia's Premier urging his province to grieve virtually. Stephen MacNeil saying the best way to honor the victims of the mass killings is to keep each other safe from COVID-19. And he says as difficult as it is, that means not gathering in groups until the pandemic has passed. So people came together the best they could today to pay their respects. And the signs that are scattered across Nova Scotia are visible. The CBC's Colleen Jones has more.
The flags are at half-staff at the RCMP station on Bible Hill. Someone's just dropped flowers. There's a handmade sign there that says, "Thank you." And along the highway, "Pray for police." Outside the church in Debert, the message that though we grieve, still we hope. And grieve we do, and we show it in these ways and more. Pilot Dimitri Neonakis flew his small plane in a flight plan that embraced the whole area with a heart.
I'm going up there and I'm going to draw a heart. I just wanted to give them a hug from the air. And in my own way to tell these people that, look, we're here together, we're here, we're thinking of you.
In Debert, hashtag Colchester Strong is giving people hope. Across the street from the sign, the Debert School. Teacher Lisa McCulley lost in the tragedy. Her classroom, though, has the signs of what an awesome elementary teacher she was.
Unbelief, really. So, I mean, she lived in a small country place, you know, outside of even the village, so you don't expect things like that there.
No one would expect it here. As people lay flowers for RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson at the Burnside headquarters, they hope it brings comfort.
Let the Stevensons know that there's people here standing with them, and we're going to keep them in our thoughts, and we're devastated by this loss.
The Onslow Belmont Volunteer Fire Brigade has lowered their flags for a fallen fireman. Homemade hearts dot the roadside. Flowers arrive in Portapeck by the mailbox along the side of the road.
I brought the flowers here for my niece Jamie Blair and her husband Greg. And their little boy said they survived it.
Normally, flowers would go to a funeral home, but there is no normal now. Colleen Jones, CBC News, Debert.
Canada's Governor-General has also expressed her sorrow in a video recorded at Rideau Hall. Here is some of Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Julie Payette's message to the people of Nova Scotia.
With Nova Scotia already under immense pressure from the challenges of the COVID-19 pandemic, this devastating act adds new levels of pain and grief. We're heartbroken. Our deepest condolences to the families and friends of the victims, and to the family and colleagues of RCMP Constable Heidi Stevenson, whose courage in the line of duty will never be forgotten.
Many of the victims of the shooting spree lived in Colchester North, a provincial riding that includes about 18,000 people. Karen Casey is the MLA for that area. She says the wounds from this tragedy will last a lifetime.
My heart, along with everybody else's heart here, is very sad. We are dealing with something that has a direct impact on all of us. And as the MLA for the area, I have been meeting with and working with my constituents for 14 years. I know them well, and it has really a very negative impact at the present time. Really dealing with the violence, really dealing with the unexpected scenario that played itself out. The normal grieving process can't be normal in this environment. We have to respect the public health directives with the social distancing. We have to do that to protect all of us. But it certainly does complicate and change the whole grieving process. I know that there will be investigations, but nobody knows at this point what motivated the shooter. And that's for the investigation to try to unravel. The fact is, there were shootings, there are multiple victims, and there are many families whose lives are scarred, and those scars will never heal. For me, with my constituents, I just need to be there. I need to listen. I need to help them grieve. I need to show compassion, and I need to help them navigate the system because there are so many questions that they may not know the answer to, and my role as an MLA is to try to help get those answers for them.
That was Colchester North MLA Karen Casey in Nova Scotia. Other Nova Scotians and Canadians are coming together to mourn and pay tribute to those who died in this vicious attack. Hannah Thibodeau has been tracking this part of the story. Hannah, how are people coping?
Well, Carol, you know as well as I do, Nova Scotia is a very tightly knit community, and some of these smaller communities are about 100 people. Maybe they go up to 250 in the summertime because they have beaches and everything around. So every single person is touched, not only in this community, but all through Nova Scotia. And one of the first people who was identified as a victim was Constable Heidi Stevenson. You see her photograph there. She was a veteran in the RCMP. She had 2 children. And today, officers and residents lined up for a procession as Constable Stephenson's body was taken to the RCMP Nova Scotia headquarters. And you can see them there paying tribute to her. This is in Dartmouth, Nova Scotia, where her body went. And then take a look at this shot. People stopped on the street, still respecting physical distance because of the COVID-19 pandemic, but they wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to pay their respects to Corporal Stephenson. Now, there are also makeshift memorials going up in places around Dartmouth. Take a look at this one. Like we heard from Colleen Jones, there are no funeral homes at this point that you can all gather at, or people's houses, because of what's happening with the pandemic. So people come and pay their tributes, pay their respects, lay their flowers, and take a moment of silence when it comes to paying tribute to these 18 people, at least 18 people who were killed in this tragic event. Here's something that, Carol, you also would know very well as an East Coaster. If we can show people the next slide, look at that. This shows what people do very well in Nova Scotia. When tragedies happen, they want to take care of everybody else, everybody who's affected. And you can see there this lady bringing some food, bringing some coffee and beverages to the RCMP, because let's remember, their work is not even close to being over. There are 16 sites at least that they are still investigating in this tragedy that happened over the past weekend.
How has the rest of Canada responded, Hannah?
Ultimate solidarity. You can see right across this country that people are giving, virtual hugs to everybody in Nova Scotia. Take a look at this. This, of course, is Parliament Hill. The flag is flying at half-mast there. And look at the lights. It just is beautiful. And again, earlier today, we saw the Prime Minister, opposition leaders, MPs holding a moment of silence and paying tribute. And then, if we go across the country, legislatures right across the country, BC, Ontario, this is Saskatchewan's legislature, Manitoba, are flying the Nova Scotia flag at half-mast to let them know, look, everybody is thinking of you. And I want to end on a bit of a positive note, and I want to show people this. Take a look at the sunset. I would just even want to be silent for a minute. Look how beautiful that is. Let me tell you what some of these people were saying on Twitter and really encapsulated this sunset tonight. There's one person who said they asked us to light a candle for all of the ones who were lost tonight, and the sky delivered. Absolutely. Another Twitter user says it feels like Mother Earth is mourning a great loss. And then another person says Nova Scotia certainly needed some beauty, and there it is. It's almost like angels are looking down.
Hannah, thank you.
You're quite welcome.
You're watching special coverage of the tragedy in Nova Scotia. This is CBC News Network. Back in a moment.
Victims, both men and women, and all were adults. It appears that some of the victims were known to the suspect, and others were targeted and not known to the suspect.
And we know tonight that at least 18 people were killed by the gunman in Nova Scotia in a rampage that started Saturday night. Investigators are looking for additional victims in 5 burned-out buildings, and police warn that piecing together evidence from 16 crime scenes will be a long and complex process. This is the deadliest attack of its kind in Canadian history.
We are so sorry for your loss. Such a tragedy should have never occurred. Violence of any kind has no place in Canada.
The Prime Minister paying tribute to the victims of the mass shooting in Nova Scotia. The violence began late Saturday night in Portapique near the Bay of Fundy and ended just outside of Halifax and Enfield the following day. Among the dead, a 23-year veteran of the RCMP, the mother of 2 young children. Police are investigating multiple crime scenes. Nova Scotians gave an overwhelming show of support for the police today. Hundreds of people lined the streets in the community of Enfield. They welcomed home a Mountie who had been wounded in the killing spree and then hospitalized. Carolyn Ray has that story.
Outside the RCMP detachment in Enfield, small gestures of thanks, deliveries of flowers, teddy bears, and a Canada flag filled with messages for a fallen officer.
We just wanted to reach out just not to the community but to the officers. They're still on their feet going. So we stopped and we picked up some treats like fruits and vegetables and coffee to keep them going, to show them that they have support just not in their own community but everywhere.
I told them God bless them and wish them good luck in service.
The officers here say every visit is appreciated, a bright moment in a horrible time. Just down the road, a gesture on a much larger scale. Charlene Kewen discovered that the officer injured in the shooting was getting out of the hospital. She decided to give Chad Morrison a hero's welcome home.
Within probably 15 minutes, there was hundreds of likes and comments, and everybody wanted to take part.
In no time, there were hundreds of people, firefighters and RCMP officers cheering along several kilometers of road through Enfield and Lance.
Kind of got emotional. I had my son with me, and you got to see his face, and you got a face to the story, and he put his life in front of harm's way for every single one of us that was scared yesterday, and I don't know, it's just very emotional, to tell you the truth.
And it was really a humbling experience to see people out with their Canada Day flags, and to see all the RCMP officers out here. It was truly humbling to know that we're being protected by them, and they're our modern day heroes for sure.
A much-needed moment of comfort for a community. While they couldn't embrace each other, watching these reunions gave them all something to hold on to. Carolyn Ray, CBC News, Lance.
And that is our program for you tonight. I'm Carole MacNeil. Stay with CBC News Network for the latest updates. Nova Scotia is a very musical province, so it's no surprise people are expressing their grief through music. Eric Graham is a volunteer firefighter and the pipe sergeant of the Colchester Correctional Service Canada Band. We received this video from his wife, Caitlin, who said her husband was honored to pay his respects to the victims in this tragedy. Good night.